Welcome back into Dawson Now. This podcast episode that's dropping right before your election. I couldn't think of a finer person to be our guest for this episode. He is a former political candidate. He is an author. He is a political commentator. He's a pastor. As you know, once a pastor, always a pastor. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to welcome into Dawson Now, Governor Mike Huckabee. Welcome in, Governor.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to have that wonderful crowd giving me the applause. Not something I'm used to these days, so thank you. Great to be with you.
Welcome to 2020. Anyway, well, you know, I know your name is synonymous across the country for being involved not only in faith, but in politics, in culture. But let's start back at the beginning. You started out as a pastor of a church in Arkansas.
Yeah, you know, what most people don't know, my first career was not the pastorate. It was actually advertising and radio, television. And I was running an ad agency. I'd started working in radio at the age of 14. And that's what paved my way through junior high, high school, college, and grad school, was doing broadcasting. And I thought my career would be in Christian broadcasting in some realm, and then eventually run for office. And then my life took a detour. And it's one of those God things where the Lord steered me into the pastorate. I really was not expecting that, but it became maybe the most important chapter of my life in preparing me for what would ultimately be the next chapter. 6 years at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, pastoring Emmanuel Baptist Church, and then almost 6 years at Beach Street First Baptist Church in Texarkana. And in both of those churches, I was a bit unconventional as a pastor because I didn't have what I would call the traditional background to be pastor. Again, I'd been in advertising, radio, television, broadcasting. So I employed what I knew. And both churches, we started community television stations and really used that as a great tool of outreach to the community. And my philosophy always was be salt, be light. If the community has darkness, penetrate the darkness, go pierce it. And using broadcast tools, but also other forms of ministry, everything from helping people with needs that they have for food and shelter, but yet maintaining a strong evangelistic emphasis, because ultimately, if all you do is feed people and even encourage people, but they don't know Jesus, then what have you done for them other than sort of giving them a happier trip to the everlasting without the hope and assurance of everlasting life in heaven? I mean, that never has made sense to me. So anyway, but it was an amazing time. And Scott, let me just say why I think it was such an important part of my life in preparation for then later becoming governor and being in politics. Pastors, I think, are the most qualified people to run for public office, which goes against the grain of what most people think, because I know when I announced that I was running, people thought I was nuts. And there were many people, particularly church people, who would say, I just don't think Christians generally, and pastors specifically, ought to get involved in politics, which is basically saying, let's surrender our culture, let's surrender our government to the people who don't have a biblical worldview. Well, no wonder we get what we get. But the other reason was that, as I've said many times, and you and I've had this conversation, I know, during your candidacy, the reason a pastor has a perspective that no other candidate has is that the pastor is the only person in a community that I'm aware of who, no matter the social pathology, can put a name and a face to the problem that we face in our world. Teen pregnancy, he's the first one that 14-year-old came and talked to. Elderly people struggling with poor health and having to decide whether to take medicine or have food, who do they talk to? Their pastor. Who holds their hand in ICU at 2 a.m. when the doctor comes in and says, you have to make a decision whether we take the person off life support? It's the pastor. Who's the person who's there when a family says, my teenager is on drugs, can you help us? So what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter whatever and I call them social pathologies, the things that are really ruining people's lives. Whatever that is, the pastor does not deal with it from an abstract perspective. He knows people, name and face, has been in their homes. And it's also the only profession where a person sees the full spectrum of humanity from the beginning to the end, the birth of the baby, the death of the elderly person, the best moments of life, the weddings, the birthdays, and the worst moments of life, the car accident, the cancer diagnosis. So I just felt that it was amazing to me that many of the people making public policy decisions didn't understand very much about the very people for whom those decisions were being made.
Yeah, and to me, we love to hear you, or I love to hear you on not only radio, but see you on Fox and your own television show now. But behind the scenes, you're the same person. You're a genuinely nice guy, and I appreciate that.
I'm going to quote you on that.
Please do. I mean, you are. I've seen you in so many different circles. Now, you can slay someone with your tongue and smile while you're doing it, but you're still a nice person. So as we go into this, you are a trailblazer in Arkansas politics, because when you were elected, you were one of the first, or maybe the first, statewide elected office as a Republican.
Well, it had been 25 years, and there'd only been 3 before me in 150 years. One governor lasted 2 years, one 4, and one lieutenant governor lasted 4. That was it for 150 years. So I was really kind of the skunk at the garden party when I got to the Capitol as lieutenant governor. And they were so upset that I had won, furious, to the point that when I got to my office after being sworn in, I'd been upstairs to the house to be sworn in. I came back down, and my door to the office of lieutenant governor had been nailed shut, physically nailed. Now, a lot of people think that's an apocryphal story, but the Wall Street Journal flew a reporter down to check out its accuracy and talked about how this is the most bizarre thing. And my office remained nailed shut for 59 days. And it happened at the order of Webb Hubbell, who was working at the White House at the time for Bill Clinton. And they were so angry that someone in their state, Bill Clinton had just gone to Washington as president in 1993. I won in the special election. And so Webb Hubbell called the Secretary of State, Bill McEwen, and said, this cannot stand. We have to just teach this guy a lesson. So they did. They nailed my door shut. But in essence, it was Genesis 50 come to life. What was intended for harm turned out for good, because their intention to destroy me made people sympathetic. And people were really livid by the fact that the power establishment of the political kingdom of Arkansas could do something so brazenly hateful and nobody hold them accountable for it. So the next year when I ran for re-election, I got the largest amount of votes in the history of the state for any Republican, and went on to win not just that race, but become governor when the the then governor had to resign. I moved up to the governor's office and was reelected twice by comfortable margins. So it all, as we say in the South, it all came out in a wash.
So during those 59 days, am I correct in saying that you continued to carry out your office duties just out in the hallway? You just kept on business as normal? Yeah,
that's right. I mean, what I did, I set up a little card table.
That is awesome.
And we had no furniture, and I put an easel out by the side of the office, and I said, 13 days as lieutenant governor, and no office, 14 days. And I kept changing it every day. Well, the press would come and report it. They would put pictures. I mean, it became not just a statewide, but a national news story about how the Democrats had nailed shut the door to the duly elected lieutenant governor in Arkansas. And so at some point, there was just a backlash against the state Democratic establishment. And even the people out in the counties were calling and saying, look, this is stupid. It makes us look like a bunch of goons. For gosh sake, open the guy's door, because, we don't want to be associated with this. So finally, they relented. I'll tell you an interesting little sidelight. One guy brought a crowbar up to the Capitol and said, here, this will get that door open. And I knew intuitively not to do it. And one of the Capitol police officers, who was very sympathetic to what was going on and realized how utterly wrong it was. He told me, he said, you were wise not to use the crowbar to open the door. We were instructed that if you did, we were to arrest you for defacing and destroying state property. Wow. So they were hoping that I would do something like that. Instead, I did the opposite. And I just took it in stride, and I said, whether I have an office in the hallway on a card table or whether I have it in the designated spot, it doesn't change the outcome of the election. And it was a real turning point, not just for me, but I think for the Republican Party of Arkansas. By the way, now, at that time, Republicans held less than 6% of any offices statewide, and there was only a handful of Republicans up in Northwest Arkansas. Today, Republicans hold every constitutional office. They hold every one of the congressional delegation seats, senators and congressmen. They have supermajorities in the House and Senate. And now out in the counties, places where Republicans didn't even get 20 votes, now control the county courthouses. It's been a complete flip, and kind of fun to watch that, to be honest.
And you were on the front lines of seeing the South really turn more conservative towards Republicanism. And during your, you had 2 runs for office, the highest office of our land. And it didn't turn out the way you nor I wanted it to turn out. You were my guy. You do have your thumb on today's culture. You know the pulse of it. Tell us this: how do you? We were talking before we started your schedule of all the interviews, all the things you've got going on. You've had a successful radio show, television show. Those happened at the same time. You have another television show that's going on right now on TBN called Huckabee. You speak almost every night. How do you do everything you accomplish?
It doesn't even seem that wacky to me because I'm so into the rhythm of it. There are days when I just look at my schedule, look at myself, and I'm saying, why don't you go home and relax a little bit? And during the early days of the pandemic, when everything shut down and all the events that I had scheduled, I had like 6 trips overseas that I was supposed to do. I had 35 events between the middle of March and the middle of May that I had, speaking events. Of course, everything got canceled, everything. And I was home more during this past spring than I have been home since I was a student in high school. And that is the truth. So, there was a part of me that kind of enjoyed that, but there was a part of me, I'd go into the closet and I'd see my suitcase and it was crying. It wanted to go to the airport. It knew that we were missing something. But, I've taken it in stride. It's just, you kind of go where God leads you to go. And in one way, it's a little nutty. I'm busier now than maybe I've ever been in my life. As you mentioned, I've got the TBN television show, which is frankly the most fun I'm having. We tape it in Nashville before a live audience. We have phenomenal guests. And it's just a great, entertaining, fun show. It's not all politics. It's not just a serious, let's tell everybody how bad the world is kind of show. We want to inform people. We have political guests. We've had the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, many members of the Senate and House, and I've had the prime minister of Israel, and I've had the president of Poland. So we've had very distinguished political guests. But I don't want it to be all politics, and it isn't. We have people that maybe you've never heard of, but have amazing stories to tell. Because it's TBN, I'm free to let them share if it's a Christian story, without sort of having to dial it down as I would on Fox. And then we do lots of music, because after all, we're in Nashville. We have a phenomenal band. These are all session musicians in Nashville that comprise the house band. And we've had the Beach Boys. We've had Dionne Warwick. We've had Gary Lewis from the 60s, a lot of just wonderful artists, the Oak Ridge Boys, and on and on. John Rich was just with us last week doing his amazing song called Earth to God, which is just one of those once-in-a-generation kind of songs. But every week we have comedians. We have Nick Walinda, who's coming in to do a high wire act in December. That ought to be a hoot.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's the show. Then I'm still a Fox contributor. I'm on the speaking circuit, taking trips to Israel, if we ever get to do them again. Those have all been curtailed. And then I launched a podcast just this week on Quake Media, which will run every week. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it.
Well, and then in light of all of that, you had time to write a book, The 3 C's That Made America Great: Christianity, Capitalism, and Constitution. It is a great read. I've read it, and it's phenomenal. I challenge everyone to go through it. I would like to ask, even though I feel like I know, what made you write the book?
Well, I was approached by Steve Fiesel, who is the co-author of the book, and he said, I'd like to ask you to work with me. Let's put together a book that talks about the underpinnings of American society and culture and law. I was intrigued by that, and so we worked on it. And I'm going to tell you, it's really, I think it's a great resource book. I've told people, because we document everything in the book. We did not just say we think, we feel, we believe. It's here are the documents, here are the footnotes, here's the references. So if a person is saying, is America a Christian nation? What makes our Constitution different? Why is capitalism better than socialism? We approach this from the fact that there are 3 basic underpinnings or foundations on which America was built. And those are Christianity, capitalism, and the Constitution. Take any of those legs out from under the stool, and the 3-legged stool becomes a 2-legged stool, and it collapses. And that's why we feel that, as we explain why these 3 foundations are so important, not just to the creation of the country, which they were, but to the continuation of the country, and why the threats to any one of these, whether it's the Judeo-Christian value system upon which we were built, whether it's capitalism, the idea of free enterprise, personal liberty, property ownership, or whether it's an adherence to a rule of law through the Constitution that defines not only the checks and balances of our government, but the limitations of our government, which is singularly the most important thing the Constitution does. It limits government. It doesn't limit the liberty of people. So that's what the book does. And I think a lot of people have come and said, I learned things that I never knew, especially about Ivy League schools and how every single one of them, except Cornell, was founded to train Christian ministers and to propagate the gospel. I mean, how many Harvard students or faculty members even know that the school is named after a 31-year-old minister named John Harvard, who died at that early age, donated his books and his passing to the creation of a school that required all of its students and faculty to have prayer and Bible study twice every day. And the statue of John Harvard, which sits in the middle of Harvard Yard, students pass by it every day. I'll bet you that there's not 20 students on the Harvard campus, if that, with any clue what the heritage of their school is all about.
Well, and you're in the book. We'll take each C individually, but Christianity, the left is, and there is just a movement to rewrite our history, specifically to remove any Christian influence whatsoever. That's very important for us to go forward, because our children and our children's children will never know the true birth of our country and the significance of Christians involved with that. Tell me some ways specifically in the book that you address how that's happening, and maybe some of the things we could do to help change it, if there is.
You know, the founders never believed that you had to be a Christian to be an American, never believed that the country was founded on a specific church or doctrine or sectarian view. But here's what they understood, and this is where the influence, and I use the Judeo-Christian because without the Old Testament, there is no New Testament. Without the Jewish tradition, there is no Jesus. So, but understand that when we say a Christian nation, here's what basically makes this so. What our founders embraced was the notion of individualism versus statism. This is a Christian understanding that I am personally responsible to God, accountable to God, because I was personally created by God, for God, and that my identity is not in a group to which I belong. It's not my gender, it's not my race, it's not my last name, my occupation, my father's occupation, or how much land we own. And that was the premise of people's identity at the time of the Revolution. If you didn't have closeness to the crown, you didn't get to own property. And if your father was a candle maker, that's what you were going to be. It's the way it worked. And there was a system almost like the caste system of India, where you pretty much had to stop where you were started. Well, our founders had a view that was biblical, and that is that we are individuals. And so when they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Didn't say we're all the same, because we're not. But it said we're equal in intrinsic worth and value. That is a powerful statement. In fact, it was so powerful, to coin a phrase, it was revolutionary, and in fact started one. So I would never mean to say, nor do we try to advance in the book, that all of the founders were Bible reading, hymn singing, front row pew sitting Christians.
Several were, though.
Weren't. But many were. Yeah. Many more were than we ever get credit for. And many were ministers. This is another part. Quite a few of them, even signers of the Declaration, were pastors. But the point is, even the ones who weren't recognized that our form of government could not function, could not exist apart from this Christian understanding of the individual.
Yeah. And again, what I love is it's not only your words, but you document it. Everything is put up as a footnote. You can go back and reference it. It's the 3 C's that made America great: Christianity, capitalism, and the Constitution. Now, I'm sure you can get this on Amazon. Yeah, I got mine at a bookstore. You can get it at MikeHuckabee.com. So all those, wherever good books are located, you can get your copy. So let me go to capitalism, because a lot of people that I run with in conservative circles, they just almost have that mindset, America could never become socialistic. But it was to the point where our president, during the State of the Union address, had to announce in the Capitol that America would never become a socialistic country. It almost seems like if we're saying it that loudly, is it already happening before our eyes?
Yeah, it is happening before our eyes. And amazingly, I never thought I would see this. You have elected officials, even a guy who came in second twice in the Democrat primary for president, who is openly an avowed socialist, who's proud of that. And you have some of the philosophical leaders of Congress, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and others. They're avowed socialists. They're proud of it. And by socialist, what they believe is that everybody in the society should pool their resources, and then it should be redistributed according to how the politicians have determined it should be redistributed. Well, this disincentivizes work and entrepreneurial activity. It destroys the heart of what made America a phenomenal, prosperous country, which is the idea that I take great risk, but for those risks, I could potentially have great reward. And I could do things for my family I could never have done. Look, I grew up very poor. This is not a matter of, whiny me, I grew up poor. But I did. But I didn't grow up underprivileged, and I didn't grow up as a victim. And here's why. I grew up in the United States of America, and I was not required to stay where I started in the little orange brick rent house on 2nd Street in Hope, Arkansas. My parents never owned the home I lived in until I was, I guess, almost out of high school. They finally bought the little rent house and later moved to another place. And, like a lot of Americans, things got better as they saved and worked hard. But here's my point. I'm the first male in my entire family lineage to graduate high school. No male upstream from me ever got out of high school. If I'd been born in most countries, I would be catching chickens in South Arkansas still, because that's what I did when I was a kid, and I hated it. And it was a great incentive and motivator for me to want a better life. So that incentive said, get an education, work hard, treat people right, and you won't have to catch chickens for the rest of your life. And, I'm grateful to America. I've lived a life I couldn't have dreamed of. Why? Capitalism. That's why. And capitalism is really, some people try to say that it's based on greed. That is so not true. Scott, capitalism is based on the notion that I have some responsibilities to my immediate family, but I also have responsibility to my society. Americans, by the way, in charitable giving are the most generous people on earth. And more specifically, Christians in America are by far more generous. When I see some of these politicians and they talk about, we want the government to do more. If you look at their charitable giving when they release their tax returns, many of them give less than 1% away to charity. I mean, as Christians, we believe that we haven't started giving until we first meet the obligation of our 10% tithe. Then we can start giving above that. And you know, I've never thought about that as being overly generous. I just think of it as being my duty to God and my gratitude to God for all he's given me. But the point being, how many hospitals do you know that were created to honor atheism?
Yep.
I don't know of any. But most of the charity hospitals in America were developed because somebody had faith. Most of the great universities in our country were developed because people had faith. And I go back to the Ivy League schools. Now, they've abandoned their heritage. But our education system, our healthcare system, even really our entrepreneurial system, happened most often because people had great faith. They were good stewards of what they had. They were generous with what they had. And as a result, we live in, I think, without argument, the greatest country in the history of mankind.
Amen on that. Now, I have two thoughts. One, the vision in my head of you running around catching chickens, you and Rocky Balboa. That's one of the great scenes in the movie. But yeah. Two, you know, everybody just indicts capitalism with greed. And I go, greed is a sin. So we don't condone greed. We condemn greed, but so is covetousness. And it seems like coveting is just as bad as greed. So both ends of the spectrum are bad. Capitalism is where our country is built. It's growing. So I've got to get to the Constitution based on your book. And I'm going to go to the front page headlines of today, and that's the Supreme Court nominee that's being voted on. A lot of people are going, man, that is just ripping apart our Constitution. It's apparent to me we don't know our Constitution. So expound on the part of the Constitution. If you don't mind, give us a little commentary on Judge Barrett.
Well, she's a remarkable candidate to be on the Supreme Court. First of all, because she's a remarkable human being. Her Christian faith is something that is genuine and deep within her. Even Dianne Feinstein said it when she was being confirmed for the Seventh Appellate Court. The dogma lives loudly in you. I know that was a dig. I thought it was a great compliment because it said, oh, you're one of those people that actually take your faith seriously. I'm so refreshed by a person who is in public life and whose faith is not simply a line on their resume and something they can say, oh, I'm a member of a church, but they actually are an active part of their congregation. And more importantly, it is a daily commitment, Monday through Sunday, and not just on Sunday. So she's a great human being, a mother of 7, 2 adopted children from Haiti, 1 special needs child. You know, somebody remarked that she has more people sitting at her dinner table every night than Joe Biden has had at his rallies, which is very true, by the way. But the second thing that makes her, I think, truly extraordinary pick for the justice is that her view of the Constitution is exactly what we need on the Supreme Court. Here's the view: that the Constitution is not what we want it to say, and the law is not what we want it to be. It is what it is written. And the purpose of the court is simply to determine if the law is consistent with the Constitution. So the Constitution becomes the measuring stick. You take a law that has been enacted by a legislative body, you put it against the measuring stick of the Constitution, and you ask, is this consistent? If it isn't, then you say, if you want a different outcome, create a different law. Or you can change the Constitution. But you can't have this piece of legislation under our current Constitution because they don't click. That's the appropriate approach to what they do. So when people would say, oh, I want the president to nominate conservatives to the court, I would argue, say, no, I don't. I don't want conservatives on the court. I want constitutionalists. And here's the difference. I don't want liberals. I don't want conservatives. I don't want ideologues. They may have ideology. They all do. You and I do. But when you go to the court, you're supposed to take off your ideological perspective and ask very bluntly, what does the Constitution say? And what did it say at the time it was written? Not what does it mean to us now? The danger of people who have this living document mindset is the same danger when people look at the Bible and they say, well, that's what it meant then, but it doesn't mean that now. Right. Because our culture has changed. Well, Scott, I'm old school. The Word of God is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
Yep.
I may change. Culture, society, civilization may change. But the Word of the living God is inerrant, infallible, trustworthy, and does not change. So it is not my job to change the Bible to meet my culture. It's my job to try to force the culture to meet the Word of God, because that's the standard by which we should live. A constitutionalist may have passions and feelings, but you look at the Constitution for how it was written, not for how you wanted it to be written.
And, you know, to me, the Constitution, compared to other constitutions around the world, it's amazing it's lasted this long, because other countries have a new constitution every year.
If most people don't understand that the American Constitution is the longest living founding document still in use in the history of civilization. No country, no culture, no civilization has ever lived according to the same document for as long as we have. And that will shock a lot of people, but it's one of the things in the book that I think people will say, gee, I didn't know that. But it's time we know it, because our Constitution is really a remarkable document. I don't equate it with the inspiration of Scripture, obviously, but I do believe it was inspired. And I believe that it was a document that was birthed in prayer, and that it was conceived by fallible human beings. They recognized their fallibility, and that's why they did something that is absolutely genius. They created the capacity to change it, which was in itself remarkable, but they also made it hard to change it, because they knew that if it was subject to the whims and passions of any given moment in time, people would make huge mistakes. So to change the Constitution requires years and years of painstaking, tedious legislative approach in all the states to ratify an amendment and to make a change.
You know, I in a text or an email to you, I said I'm going to have to go back and reread the constitutional chapter, because because there's so many interesting facts and accounts that you give in the book, and they're all documented. I did check some of those, and I was like, wow, that really did happen. It's the 3 C's that made America great. One question that I have about the Constitution, because President Trump is getting a lot of ridicule, saying he's going up against the Constitution for even bringing up a nominee for the Supreme Court. Yeah. But 4 years earlier, President Obama brought up a nominee for the court. It was the Senate that rejected doing the hearings. Could you please make that clear for those who are listening and watching for us?
Well, 29 times in the history of our country, presidents have nominated people to the Supreme Court in a presidential election year. So this notion that this is unprecedented, that's nonsense. It's happened 29 times. And it happens that every time when the president and the Senate are of the same party, they get confirmed. And in most cases, when they weren't even of the same party, they get confirmed, because up until recent times, the Senate did not feel it was its duty to overextend its power and reject a presidential nominee. They were to advise and consent, which is their constitutional role, and they typically respected that if the people had elected this president, then he had a right to make his own picks, whether it's for cabinet or Supreme Court. But the bigger picture of this is that 4 years ago, President Obama made a presidential year nomination, Merrick Garland. His name now has become this war cry for Democrats. But the Senate was in the hands of the Republicans, and the Senate didn't bring his name up for confirmation. Now, both bodies, both the Senate and the executive branch, fulfill their constitutional obligations. the president was absolutely right to make the nomination. President Obama didn't do anything untoward by making the nomination of Merrick Garland. But here's the part that the Democrats can't accept. The Senate didn't do anything that was unconstitutional or untoward by saying, no, we're not going to bring it up. There's a difference between law and politics, and sometimes they collide. It was President Obama who said elections have consequences. It was President Obama who told the Republicans when he was ramming Obamacare down our throats that, hey, we won and we don't need your input. And they didn't have it. So, he kind of laid the groundwork. And then Harry Reid in 2013 was the one who blew up the historic filibuster process and decided that a simple majority could move legislation. So the Republicans said, you know what, you're going to regret this. And sure enough, now they do, but they won't admit it. But they basically said, okay, if you have the majority, then you do what you want. So Republicans said, okay, that's what you guys did. You've changed the rules. And now if we've gone from 3 strikes and you're out in baseball to 2 strikes, you're out in baseball, all of us, when we come to bat, we only get 2 strikes. That's how it works. So was it raw politics? The honest answer is yes. Yeah. It certainly was. But it was absolutely legal, constitutional, and appropriate. And the president this year is absolutely within his bounds to nominate, and the Senate is completely within their constitutional duty to make the approval and seat Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court.
I've got to ask, should we be concerned about this election coming up? I mean, it's happening next week. I mean, literally.
We should be. Yeah. Here's why we need to be concerned. I do worry about ballot fraud and manipulation, and that's part of it. But I also worry that the president has faced 200-knot headwinds every single day of his candidacy and most significantly in his presidency. I mean, I've never seen a president under siege like this. It's not just that the other party is against him. That's not totally uncommon, although this environment is the most vicious I've ever witnessed. And I saw some pretty vicious things against George Bush, and, that was not pretty at all. But this is unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. May have been worse in the time of Andrew Jackson or even Thomas Jefferson, but this is pretty brutal stuff. Impeaching him for something that didn't exist. I mean, that was nonsense, but they did it anyway. Having the Speaker of the House tear up his speech on national television just as a in your face, those kind of things. I mean, that's unprecedented. So the president has had to deal with them, but then he's had to deal with a media that they've abandoned any principles of journalism, any. And their single goal is to destroy him personally and to destroy everything that he's about and the people who follow him. And they've tried to undermine the election. He made the statement that they hate, that the press has become the enemy of the people. Now, he was careful to say it's not everybody. But honestly, if you look at what they've done, and I know this seems a radical statement and the press goes nuts, but if you manipulate the story and tell lies, and you do not create balance, and if you try to tip the scales by putting your thumb on them, you have become the enemy of the people because you become the enemy of the truth. And the people have a right to the facts and the truth and make up their own minds, but the press doesn't let that happen. They tell the story as they want it to be told, not as it really is happening.
Yeah. In ministerial circles, we call that a cult, because a cult will take half-truths and build on it, or or add on to truth and add an additional alignment to it. Yeah. They'll say something that's true, but it's really not the truth. And so,
well, Scott, I heard something when I was in college that still stuck with me. If you take a half-truth and tell it as the full truth, it becomes an untruth. And that's essentially what the press has done.
Yeah. Your favorite chapter. I mean, to me, I would have a hard time picking it out, but you're the author. Which one did you enjoy the most?
Honestly, I think it was in the early chapters when we talk about Christianity and we talk about and for some reason, this just really, I think, resonates with me about the institutions of higher learning in our country. When we talk about Harvard, Yale, Princeton, William and Mary, Columbia University, every one of them created to train ministers and to present the gospel and to equip missionaries. So the reaction I'm getting from the book is very strong and positive. I'm so grateful for that. But one of the things that I do hear most is I had no idea that the foundation of these Ivy League schools was spiritual in nature, and that this was why these schools were created, was to uphold the Christian faith and doctrine. And now they're doing everything they can to tear down the Christian faith and doctrine. It's a wonder, that God lets the stones on top of the stones stay there. And probably somebody will say, "Oh, he's now calling down fire from heaven." No, I'm not, because I'm not God. And I would say to those schools, you better be glad I'm not God, because I probably would. God's more patient than I am.
Absolutely. Well, what I'm going to say, we've never done this before, and I'm going to shock Will, my assistant. The first 20 people that send an email that's listening to the podcast, the first 20 that sends an email to info@scottdawson.org, if you'll just request the 3 C's that made America great, we will send one to you. You have to give us your address so we know where to send it, but we'll order some of these just to make sure they're available. I wish I could order 20,000 of them, because it is something that needs to be in the hands of every individual. The 3 C's that made America great. I love how you even bring into your ministerial heritage into your books. You've got God's guns, grits, and gravy, from hope to higher ground. Now the 3 C's. I mean, you know how to alliterate with the best of them, my friend.
Well, it's a way for me to remember the message, but it's also a way to communicate it so that other people can remember the message. But honestly, if you ask me to name the 4th premise on which the country was built, I'd have a hard time, because I really do feel like that these are the 3 legs of the stool upon which America is built. And it's one of the reasons that I've been excited about the book and the response to it. And I really believe it's a great resource for Sunday school teachers, history teachers, public or Christian school teachers, just as a reference book to be able to quickly find information about the background of our country in a pretty simple way.
I'm hoping a parent, a mom or dad that has a child in middle school or high school will get the book, because you're not going to get this in civics class. You're not going to get it. So, and that's the reason I love spending time with you. By the way, you cook a mean grilled hamburger.
Thank you.
It's one of the best out there. You introduced me to the copper thing that goes on top of the grill. I use it every time now, so thank you for that. In closing, you do a lot of work in Israel. You're not going right now because it's closed down. Why should we be concerned about Israel as Americans? And I'll go one step further. As a Christian, why should I care about what's going on in Israel?
Well, as an American, I care about it because it's the most strategic country on the other side of the world in terms of our own peace, security, and a bulwark of freedom and liberty in the midst of totalitarianism. That's a reason from a patriotic standpoint. No country more closely mirrors our own as does Israel, even more than England. Because Israel was based on the notion of people who were escaping a galloping terror. They ran from tyranny, and they wanted to create a place of peace and prosperity for their people. That's the American story. And it's based on capitalism. It's based on the idea of individual freedom. But from a spiritual standpoint, Israel is important because it was important to God. And I go back to Genesis 12 that says, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. As I said before, Scott, I'm a person of the book. I believe if the Bible says it, that's it. That settles it for me. And so if the Bible tells me that God had a special place for the people that he called his own, the people of Israel, and he marked out this territory and said to Abraham, here's the title deed. This is the land that's yours. And by the way, Jews love to joke that of all the places in the Middle East, he gave the Jews the only place that didn't have natural oil. So, it's kind of an inside joke to the Jews. But the point is, he didn't give them this wonderful, lush property. He gave them basically a barren desert, but said, it is yours. Take care of it. And they've made it lush, and they've made it fruitful. And then they were gone from it for 2,000 years. They were sent packing because of their disobedience. But then God brought them back and reestablished. And I'm just convinced that there's no explanation for the miracle of the rebirth of Israel in its homeland than the God of intervention. in the same way I believe that about America. So I'd still believe that promise that if we bless Israel, we'll be blessed. If we curse Israel, we'll be cursed. I don't want to be cursed. I'd rather be blessed.
Well, to me, thank you so much for your time. The 3 C's that made America great: Christianity, capitalism, and the Constitution. But I don't want to leave without you giving some guidance. If someone wants to watch the television show, if someone wants to grab your podcast, where can they get this information?
Well, the television show is aired every Saturday from 8 to 11 Eastern, 7:10 Central on TBN. And you have TBN. A lot of people say, I don't think I have that channel. Yeah, you do. It's on every cable satellite system. It's on broadcast in about 50 American cities. You can watch on Facebook, and you can watch live at Huckabee.tv. You can also see every segment and every episode of every show we've done on Huckabee.tv, or even get tickets to come to our theater in Nashville and be part of the studio audience. So that's how you can access the television show. It also runs on Sunday night at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 Central, and Monday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 9 Central on Newsmax. So there's no excuse for not watching Huckabee, the television show. The podcast is available at QuakeMedia.com. And then if you want to subscribe, QuakeMedia.com/Mike, and there's subscription information there. So I appreciate getting to visit with you, Scott. It's been a pleasure. I love your family, and just am grateful for your friendship, and thankful for your courage, your boldness, and we need more of what you give in terms of your message and the uncompromising commitment to the Word of God. For that, I am most grateful.
Well, thank you so much, Governor. It has been a joy. It has been an honor. You're my man. I appreciate you so much. Tell your daughter we said we're pulling for her, supporting her in any and every way she goes. My daughter says, please tell him that I love his daughter. So have a great day. Thank you for joining us. Governor Mike Huckabee.
Thank you, Scott.